So, question for today: how, or rather what, is a true Dom? Hi there, I'm a 19-year-old guy who has just, maybe a year ago, really gotten into BDSM or have been reading a whole lot about the subject. However, a thing that I do see sometimes over and over again is that a lot of subs express that a lot of Doms, especially young ones, are not true Doms. They express how the vast majority of them are only really into rough sex. So the question here really this 19-year-old is asking is, what does it mean to be a true dominant? And you've seen this language in BDSM forums as well. Oh, he's a fake Dom, and what it means to be a true Dom. This young man is trying to figure out what exactly that means. What is the spirit of a true Dom, and what makes a fake Dom?
Yeah, I think there's a ton here. This is a huge thing to unpack. And one of the things that irritates me is a lot on these forums, you get very trivial answers. I don't know what the answers were given here, but often when this question comes up, the answers that are given are very superficial of, oh, well, these people just talk about true Dom. There's no such thing as a true Dom, and these are just people who are posturing and X, Y, and Z. And yet, if we weren't pointing at anything, why does the term keep coming up? I think that it may be poor terminology, but people are emotionally trying to point at something. And so to deny that there's any substance to the idea, I think it does a disservice. Second thing I think that's interesting here is to unpack. It's interesting. He said, how or rather what is a true Dom, right? Those are different. How is what do I do? What means who am I? It's a mode of being. And I think he corrected himself correctly. And actually, that correction is in fact the difference. Is how is someone who's doing something. What is someone who is being someone. And a true Dom, quote unquote, what's being pointed at with that maybe poor language, is someone whose true nature is dominance. That is their authentic self. It's not a role that they put on and then they go back to being passive most of the time. What's being hinted at there is authenticity, is that when you are inhabiting, when you are being kinky, you are letting out more of your true self than society would allow you. You're not role-playing. Those are different. Or you're being more yourself, not less yourself. The other thing he points at is that women are trying to make this distinction between guys who are kinky and guys who are just into rough sex. And women in particular, I think, struggle with that because they'll say I'm kinky and they'll end up just getting rough sex. And one of the big differences is the psychology, is women are looking for a psychology of dominance, not just the external forms, not the how, but the what or the who, right? And it's not just that I want you to spank me, it's that I want you to spank me with a certain psychological awareness. I want you to be aware of how being spanked is affecting my psychology and to speak to me in certain ways that enhance that psychology. And that means you have to get to know the person and know how exactly a spanking affects them psychology. Is it mostly just the endorphins? There are people who just like the endorphin rush and there isn't a deeper thing, right? But there are ways of spanking that inhibit the endorphin rush. And actually you can give that person a very bad time, even if you give them a very hard spanking, because you've done it in a way that doesn't trigger endorphins. And if that's what they were looking for, you're not going to have a great interaction there. That's closer to rough sex, is, well, I just want the feeling, the emotional feeling of being with someone who is stronger than I am. That's a lot of what rough sex is. Men are usually pretty careful with women that they care about, or right? And yet we are typically stronger and bigger. And to some degree, the rough sex desire is I want to feel it, right? I want to feel that I'm with someone who's bigger and stronger than I am, who can throw me around, who can actually manhandle me. Then there's the subset of women who are really kinky and want even more than just that. They want the psychology of being dominated, right? And that is not just physical imposition of force. That is establishment of rule, of order, of the intellectual dominance of humiliation or degradation, right? The giving orders, giving tasks, right? Chores, roles. These are all much more sophisticated forms of dominance than just the physical, I can pick you up and throw you on the bed, right? And one of the so a lot of things that are getting tangled up here, that's not maybe the difference to me. Again, language is tricky, but to me, that's not the difference between a true dominant and a fake dominant. That's just the difference between kinky and rough sex. However, there is, I think, the definition of true dominant, fake dominant, and not as commonly understood. Typically, what people mean when they say fake dominant, and this is a valid use of the term as well, is they're saying this is a person who is genuinely predatory and out to do harm and is preying on the inherent vulnerability of submissive women because they have to be vulnerable in order to get their sexual needs met, even more so than women have to be anyway, right? And are preying on that in a predatory way. That's part of what's being meant by fake dom. But there's another aspect of fake dom, which is I can tell that you're just putting a roll on for these few hours or this few minutes. You're doing it, but you're not feeling it. You're not really inhabiting yourself. You're putting a roll on. And that people are very in tune with each other in these kinky circumstances. And I think that women often can feel when a guy is just role playing for her sake, usually. And that's part of what they mean by the notion of true dom.
Yeah, I think I would agree with a lot of that. I think another thing I've come across in people who talk about what a fake dom is someone who doesn't understand things like aftercare, the flip side of caring for the person after doing all the things. Aftercare is not for everybody, granted, but the sense that there is some limit to the realness of the gradation and the spanking and all of the other things that come in a kink session is that the person doesn't really feel that the play partner is lesser than perhaps them in a spiritual sense, right? They may believe that I'm stronger and I make all the decisions, I wear the pants in the family, and then so there's a hierarchy there. But in a real spiritual sense, they're like, no, I cherish you. I don't really actually think that you are some subhuman person that's just literally there to please me at every time. You have needs as well, right? And they have to be met, and that's my responsibility. And I think that's a lot of the times when people talk about fake doms,
That's the word. Responsibility is the term. I agree with that. That's maybe the additional component here is I think a lot of dominance hinges around the king archetype, what I discuss in my book, which is the archetype of power. And one of the key aspects of that kingliness is taking responsibility for what is in your domain, right? Not for taking responsibility for the flourishing of what is in your domain. And so, yes, you are the king and you get to set the rules and you get to enforce order and justice and mete out discipline and punishment, so on and so forth. Yes, that's the role of the king. But it is directed at positive ends. Otherwise, it's tyranny. But if it's directed for the well-being of the people in the domain, then it's kingship. It's wise. It's being the wise king. And similarly in dominance, when you take responsibility for the flourishing of your submissive, truly, authentically, that's what's in your heart, then all of these behaviors manifest, and it's not predatory in that way, right? You don't want to traverse her limits, right? Because that would not enhance her flourishing, right? And we try to set all these arbitrary rules about, oh, you should do this and you shouldn't do this. But all of those are symbols of what we're actually after, which is someone who authentically and truly has the well-being of their partner in mind.
Well, true dom, fake dom thing in two dimensions, right? One is the whole sort of ecology of practices that go into, say, the dominant submission game on a practical level, right? The tone of voice, the way in which the dominant does not tolerate a rule infraction, whether you're spanking them or tying them down, whatever it is that you're doing. So that whole sort of ecology of practices is, a fake dom, not fake dom defined. But then another key, almost spiritual part of it is that a true dom takes honest responsibility and of the well-being of their submissive, and that is a central tenet to the relationship and the dominance perspective of their submissive, is that this person's well-being is my responsibility.
And a key aspect, not to quote Spider-Man, but with great power comes great responsibility, and that is the truth, right? As much as that line has been memeified, there's a reason, because it is absolutely true. And part of what's happening is the submissive is giving you power and saying, yes, I will submit to your rule within whatever scope that relationship is. But with that power comes responsibility, and a fake dom is one who wants the power but doesn't want to take the responsibility. That's another way of kind of looking at it.